It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 224, and if you're new to the show, hang on for just a few minutes because we're going to talk to Matt Dillahunty. Also, if you're new, part of the show is to talk about investments and or finance or things like that, and today we're going to talk about debt. So just hang tight. It's not going to be long because the interview with Matt went long. I know, you're shocked. We get to Matt and I together in the room. We can't talk for just 10 minutes, so it's a long interview, but I think you're going to really enjoy it. So this part is going to be a little shorter than normal, but I had a few people recently talk to me about debt and debts, and sometimes I've been compared to the Dave Ramsey of atheism, which is fine because that dude's making freaking more money than he knows what to do with, but we have disagreements, which is awesome because it gives us something to talk about. And one of the things that Dave Ramsey talks about, and I have a lot of people that contact me that are very, very concerned about their debts, and some of them, quite frankly, should be. We're not talking about credit card debts here. If you've got a credit card debt and you're paying 15, 18, 21% or more, or you have bad credit and you have a car loan like that, pay it off. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Just pay it off hardcore, pay it off as fast as you can. If you're paying 20% debt, paying it off is getting a guaranteed risk-free rate of return of about 20%. But then you get the other extreme where, like I told a story about where I bought a car and I financed it for 6 years at 2%, even though I could have actually just paid for it because I see debt as a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for your benefit or it can be used to turn, on you and hurt you. So 20% debt, really, really bad. 2% debt, really, really good. And the question I get from people sometimes is like, okay, Phil, well, what about my house? And we've done episodes on that. If you can borrow money at 3.75, 4, 4.25, 4.5, and of course, that may be tax deductible, likely it is, unless you've got some weird situation, check with your own tax expert. You're borrowing money at 4, 4.25, 4.5, tax deductible. You can make considerably more than that in the market. Easy answer. 5%, same thing, 6%. Well, recently someone tested me and they said, hey, Phil, just got out of college and, in their mid-20s, and they've got $100,000 of student loan debt. Now, actually, their number was much bigger, but I'm going to try to make the math simple because this is going to hurt. You might need a pencil for this one. They have $100,000 of debt, and it just so happened that they had someone in their family that passed away. Sorry to hear about that again, and left them about $100,000. And the question they had to me was, since these are all private college loans, not from the government, which is another crisis in our country for another show, but should they take that $100,000 and invest it, or should they take that $100,000 and pay off the 8% student loan that they're going to be paying on for the next 25 freaking years? Now, it's staggering to think about having a debt that's going to last you 25 years for something you've already gotten the benefit from. I guess, it's like going out to a restaurant or buying stuff, but you paid for college. A house is one thing because you could always sell it and get the money and then settle the debt unless you go upside down. But so we're going to do some maths. The first thing to know is that if you have this $100,000 student loan debt and you are paying 8% interest, you are going to pay $772 a month, $9,000 $264 a year, and you're going to end up paying over 25 years, $231,600. And of course, if you look only at that, and you could think to yourself, why don't I take $100,000, pay that off, and avoid paying $231,000? Makes a lot of sense to me. The question is, can you do something else with that money? So if your question to me was, should I pay off my $100,000 student debt, or should I buy a yacht? Or I don't know if you can get a yacht for $100,000. If I should buy a boat for $100,000, a nice boat. Well, the answer, obviously, pay off the student loan, dumbass. Get rid of that and don't buy something incredibly luxurious, which actually kind of dovetail into something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I don't get a lot of these calls, but I do get a few of them. And sometimes I talk to people in person that, and this is at all ages. This is not just the 25-year-old example, but at all ages, sometimes people will give me this thing about, well, they've worked hard enough now and they deserve some luxury even though they've not saved. I really have issues with that attitude. Just get that shit out of your head. Commercials, get the thing that you deserve. Get this that you deserve. You don't deserve shit. You earn things. You have to save money. You have to pay for them. Okay, so my little rant aside. So you could pay off this $100,000 student debt at 8% and avoid paying $231,600 in the long run. That's nice. Can we do better? And so the question is, what if you could invest that money and make 8%? Now, for all of this, we're excluding inflation, because inflation is going to be the same whether you're saving or investing money or paying off a debt, I think. So correct me if I'm wrong. You guys know how to reach me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. But if you could invest that money, $100,000, one time, and you add nothing to it, and you make 8% a year, this is one of these figures that just blows people's minds. And I also have a hard time sometimes wrapping my head around it. But that $100,000, if you make 8% every year, you could make $685,000. So you could avoid a total debt payment of $231,000, or you could make $685,000. I prefer $685,000. Now, of course, the question someone's going to ask is, well, Phil, at 8%, I might have to pay taxes on it. Of course, my calculation of $684,000 was 8% paying no taxes. Depending on how you invest, you might have capital gains, you might have income taxes from dividends. However, if you put it in an IRA or a Roth IRA or a 401k, you could make a whole lot more, but how does one take $100,000 and go plop? Okay, you can't do that right away, so you're going to have to pay some taxes. The funny thing is that even if you only netted 4, you would have $266,000, which you're going to do better than 4%. That's more than the 231. But the 8% making $684, if you're paying 20% tax, you're going to make $547. And let's change it to 40% tax. You could still make $400,000 in the long run. So you can make a lot more. Now, of course, if you can invest it in the stock market, and based on the S&P 500 data as posted in Wikipedia, it says since 1970, the S&P 500 has made 10.3%. Will it make that for the next 25 years? I don't know. But when we look at annualized 25-year time periods, the best it's ever done per year for 25 years is 17.25%. Don't expect that. The absolute worst it's done is 9.15% per year. Don't expect that either. It's too low. It should be closer to 10. Use 9 if you want to be really, really conservative. But if you can make 9 or 10% on this money, 10%, the money turns into $1.1 million. So in 25 years. Now, the other thing that this person we were talking about, they said, well, what if I pay off the debt with the $100,000 and take the $9,264 that I was paying every year in payments and invest that. Well, the interesting thing is that with really low interest rates, that would actually make you more money because you keep adding money. But when you get to higher interest rates, it turns out the lump sum would be better in investments. But if you took the $9,000 plus dollars in payments and invested it $9,000 a year, you would still have $950,000. It's not as much as leaving the $100,000 invested, but still an awful lot of money. So even that's not so bad. So now the problem is that, well, you could save all the money on the interest and then invest the payments, and you would actually have more money by making payments to yourself. Now, this is assuming that you have a really high interest rate on your debt, 8% or more, and that you make 10% or less on your long-term investments. So you get to this point where it's kind of kind of equilibrium. So if you have an 8% debt, you definitely don't want the debt. But do you pay it off and invest? Do you just invest? Do you do a blend? It gets a little tricksy, and there's not a really straightforward answer. I think the bigger things to think about: one, what would make you happy? Would you be happier not having the debt? That's a nice thing to have. Two, do you at some point want to buy a house or some other investment because you're 25 in this scenario, and having $100,000 of student loan debt might make it difficult for you to qualify for a house? That's another thing. Now, on the other side, will you make the payment every single month to your retirement plan, period? When you have a student loan debt and you set up an automatic payment from your bank to pay $722 a month, you know what's going to happen if you don't make a payment. They're going to come for you, right? It may not be one or two, but you're going to have penalties and fees. And so you're going to find a way to make those payments. If you're investing, do you have the rigor to pay yourself? Are you going to do that? So when you get to debt ratios, 7.5%, 8%, 9%, you could make 10% in the stock market in the long run. Theoretically, a lot of ups and downs. You may have to wait 25 years for that result. Odds are mathematically you're going to be better off in the stock market. But on the other hand, you still have the debt. So it's not a cut and dry situation, even when I look at the math. I got all these numbers in front of me, and I'm terrified that this is all confusing to the listeners. But there is a logical argument to paying off the debt right away or paying it off faster. And there's also a very good logical mathematical argument for investing the money right away. So hopefully that helped. I'm not sure that it did, but that's kind of how it works. So I'm going to stick with, if you can get money for 6% or less, don't worry about it. Debt is your friend. Debt is a tool. If the debt is 10% or more, pay it off. Pay it off fast. Find a way. Get a second job. It's that in-between range, over 6 and under 10, that it gets kind of squishy. And if I had to, I would say 7.5% or less, don't worry about it. 7.5 to 8% or more, think about paying the debt a little faster. If you have to take the $100,000 out of a 401k or a 403b or an IRA or something to pay off that debt, do not do it. Even though you're going to pay interest to yourself, if you change your jobs, you have to get all the money back in there, and you won't be able to because you're using it to pay off the student loan. You're going to have a penalty and tax consequences. It's going to be a disadvantage. We're talking about if you just have $100,000 sitting plop in your lap, can you pay off a $100,000 bill? It could go either way. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk to Matt Dillahunty.
There are people who believe that dinosaurs and men lived together, that they roamed the earth at the same time. There are museums that children go to in which they build dioramas to show them this. And what this is, purely and simply, is a clinical psychotic reaction. They are crazy. They are stone cold fuck nuts. I can't be kind about this because these people are watching the Flintstones as if it were a documentary. Now, there is a big difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that is the New Testament God is really kind of a great guy. He is, especially when you compare him to the Old Testament God, who is a prick. I don't know what happened to God, over time, how he matured, if he went to an anger management class. Or maybe just the birth of a son calmed him down. But before he had the kid, holy fuck, he was out of control.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are still listening to the Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have Matt Dillahunty. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am fantastic, and of course, you and I just had the luxury of hanging out in the city of St. Louis. Did you recover all right from that trip?
I did, actually. It was the funny thing was that I had to get back Monday after the convention because my brother and his family, who live in St. Louis, were driving to Austin, Texas while we were in St. Louis at the convention so that they could spend a week down here on vacation. And there was one screw up at the airport on Monday. Turns out I wasn't actually booked to fly home that day. I was booked to fly home a month later.
Oh.
So marginal oversight there on the booking, but we managed to work it out. And I got home, spent a great week with my brother and his kids, and we went to the Schlitterbahn Water Park and floated the Kamal River. And then I took a day or so off to recover from the vacation that was supposed to help me recover from conventions.
Well, and of course, you're in Texas, so we assume it's a little warmer than Chicagoland. Last night, we had 53 degrees overnight, and today it is screaming bloody hot out. I think it's 82.
It's 89 right here.
Ah.
And Austin, first of all, is not as humid as the Houston area.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And so we'll get over 100. As a matter of fact, I think it's probably going to be over 100 Sunday when I'm gone. But it stays, and it's actually been raining. So we got a little bit we got some flooding in the past couple of days. So it's been nice.
So, of course, in Texas, you guys have some really genius politician picks. How's that working out for you now?
Yeah, I can't even keep up with it because of the stuff it's like the stuff that's going on at the national level is way more than I can keep up with. The stuff that's going on at the state level is more. And then there's local issues and school boards and state board of education. And it seems like just when I thought that we were, really strongly trending away from some of the problems, those problems are now coming back again, where the State Board of Education, they're getting ready to review standards again. And every time that happens, no matter what the standard is, there are a group of fundamentalists who vote their people in and want to just stand, stalwart in the face of actual science and actual history. And let's paint everything according to our preconceived notions, because there's this idea that, get them while they're young. And if you can strongly influence the mind of children, even in subtle ways, you can get them to lean more your direction. I'm speaking at the American Atheist Convention in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And David just sent out an email asking all the speakers to give, a title and synopsis. And it bugs me every time I get one of those emails because I don't hardly ever title my talks, and I usually don't have a synopsis Well, like in St. Louis, I wrote my talk about 2 hours before I gave it, while Stephanie Katormson was giving hers. And I don't write out the talk. I do an outline. I know what I want to talk about, and then it's a little more extemporaneous and off the cuff. But this time, for St. Charles, or for the South Carolina event, I knew what I was going to talk about, and it's going to be about get them while they're young. And in particular, Beth and I love to go antique shopping, and I found a book from 1937 that's called Bible Stories as Told to Really Young Children, I think I don't have it in front of me, but it's really young children, really small children, something like that. And I read through it, and it was interesting to see how everything had been softened and the language had been changed. And it's weird to see how they were manipulating these stories with what they would leave out. So I'm going to read some from that book and compare it to the book that it's drawing from, and talk about, how this dishonesty and framing sets people up to not realize some of the bigger problems. There are problems that I didn't realize until very recently. I'd been doing the show for years. I think the best example, my upbringing was God loves you, and he loves you so much that he was willing to die to save you from hell. Now, that particular framing is a positive thing.
Sounds pretty sweet, right?
Somebody's out looking out for you. And I met several people recently in the past couple of years who their entire lives, they had a completely different take on that. And it was one that would have never registered with me while I was a believer. But now hearing it, I understand exactly how they got there. And their take was, something I did or something I will do was so terrible that God had to kill his own son for me. Now, that's a completely different spin on that you are so fundamentally bad. I'll talk about it, when I'm in South Carolina, but I think the difference in perspective has to do with, I walked down the aisle at the age of 5 at a revival and accepted Jesus into my heart. I was surrounded by, a Christian family the entire time, and it was very much focused on the positive. When I thought my friends were going to hell and I wanted to, tell them about Jesus to save them from it, something about it didn't register with me that, this has to happen or these people are going to, be in eternal torment. That part of it didn't register because I was so focused on the positive thing of you can be saved. There is a way out, and, there's life jackets all around you. You're just not grabbing them type thing.
Well, I love the angle with the kids, and I would assume you're aware. I don't know if you've ever seen my talk about getting kids out of religion. Mm-hmm. And it's something I've given occasionally in various forms for the last 4, 5, 6 years maybe. And the first time I even proposed that I was going to give a talk about how to get kids out of religion, there was gasps and clutching of pearls. And, of course, someone said something along the lines of, well, that's what Christians do. And I said, I know, and there's a reason they do it. And if you get a kid when they're 5 or confirmation when they're 13, the entire system is set up to have you so involved into the system that by the time you're a fully functioning and rationally thinking adult, it's too late. And all I suggested was that you expose kids to how to think, how to see different things in the world, and exposure to different religions. And that's too much. But it's a fascinating thing. So I'm delighted that you have picked that up, and I'm delighted you found that book, and you're going to address that. And I can't wait to hear the talk because I'll be there.
I can't wait to figure out what I'm going to say, which will probably happen. I've been, one of the things is people are like, how can you possibly outline your talk on the flight to an event? And I operate a little differently. Seth Andrews, I love him, one of my absolute best friends. We talk all the time. He puts together an incredible, slideshow presentation that he works on
meticulously.
Done, timing and everything else, and it's wonderful. I can't do what Seth does. I don't like reading to people. I don't like being read to. I'm no good at anything that comes close to that. Seth is a master at it. but I live on live TV and in live debates and in this venue of thinking on my feet. And I am so entrenched in the movement or the movements, the atheism, skepticism, all this stuff. I think about this all the time. I could be sitting down, playing a video game, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking about different ways to phrase things, having little mini debates with myself. I don't know if there's actually something wrong with me or not, but what ends up happening is by the time I'm on my way to a venue, I have 4 or 5 things that have been eating away at me for months of a specific take on a topic. And I grab the one that just feels most solid to me at the moment. The only exceptions are when somebody says, hey, we'd like you to come, give a lecture on magic and skepticism, because those are a little bit more prepared. They're a little bit more structured. But I've had this book. Beth and I found it probably a year and a half ago at a flea market or antique shop, and I've been reading and thinking about it, and that's how I do it. When people are like, "How can you do that?" So you just get on a plane, you write your outline. It's because technically it's already written.
Well, and it's one of those things that everybody has their style, and I've seen presenters, and we've already mentioned one, but I've seen others that it's clear to me they have written word for word the entire thing. It's not bad. Matter of fact, it can be incredible. They've written the entire thing word for word, and you're on the other end of the spectrum where you maybe, I don't know how many notes you have, but you have 10 bullet points, and you're going to do an hour talk on that. And what I'll do is I'll do a simple little PowerPoint, and I do at least what I've called vignettes, where I have little stories that I can plug and choose and put in like building blocks. And if someone were to say, Phil, give a talk now, go, and here's your topic, that wouldn't bother me. But there's people that no matter how much they prepare, no matter how much free form they have, they don't want to get in front of a couple hundred or a couple thousand people or even 5 people and give a talk. That always surprises me because I think it's the greatest thing to do, and it's great fun.
And it keeps everybody from being the same, too. I mean, I'll do almost any podcast. Somebody says, like, hey, can you do our podcast? As long as I'm in town and there's time, I will. And some of them have said, hey, here's an advanced list of questions we're going to ask you. And I just delete it and tell them I don't want it. For me, I want to be in the moment. Well, and I love making people think, and I love watching people think.
It's extra lucky that I didn't prepare anything for this then.
I am. I'm incredibly lucky. It's one of those things where I think what people see when I'm on a podcast or when I'm doing a talk is they get to watch me think on the fly, especially during Q&A sessions. Somebody asks a question. There's very few questions that people can ask where I have kind of a stock answer. There's a couple because, I think they're easy and I like the way, particular answer sounds. But you get to watch somebody think. And I think I love it. So I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Or, as is experienced on your show, well, not your show, the show that you're on, The Atheist Experience, in case the listeners don't know, go find either the audio or video version of The Atheist Experience. And Matt is on there and many other great people. But sometimes you get people on that just cannot seem to comprehend what you're asking, and they refuse to answer the question you're asking, and it's just happened recently, where they'll go back and say, but in the Bible or in the Quran, you just had one of those.
Yesterday.
And you'll say, well, okay, but my question is, and they go, okay, I can answer that. In the Quran, and you're like, oh my gosh, no, that's not what I asked you. Listen very carefully, and they can't do it. There's something about the indoctrination, something about the mental wall that goes up that prevents them from being able to genuinely listen and understand to what you're saying and respond to it.
Yeah, and I think, people say, I've done this show for 13 years, and, the call, well, I would say the call you're talking about happened this Sunday, but actually that call's happened 100 times in the last 13 years.
Yeah.
It's just we had it again this Sunday. The show can get repetitive, and, I bet I've mentioned slavery in, half or more of the episodes I've done in the last year, because I think it's the single best example that exposes a problem. But I do it in different ways. And people will ask, well, how can you keep doing the show? Haven't you heard all this stuff before? Yes, I can. Yes, I have heard it all before. I make a game out of it. The game is my own. It takes place in my head. It doesn't have a scoring system, and there's no winner or loser. But my goal is to keep in mind, first of all, it's somebody's first time watching the show. And to note that maybe the caller has heard my response to this somewhere else, and it didn't stick. So let me find a new response and another new response, another new response. And in my head, I'm keeping, an informal tally of what seems to stick. What gets me to, at a minimum, a different response from them. If they start talking about morality and I give a stock answer and I keep getting the same replies over and over again, a key point of interest for me is, let me give a slightly different answer, not anything dishonest or inaccurate, but let me try and frame this in a different way or attack it from a different angle. And if that gets me the same response, okay, then it's probably on par with the previous ones. But if it gets me a different response, then it's either better or worse. And now the game is to figure out, did I improve things or did I make this worse? And, you go with that because no two people believe for exactly the same reason. And they're not going to be convinced, by the same argument, or, sometimes you may have to be exposed to it many times.
I had never really thought through the fact that you're doing that, but knowing you, it makes complete and perfect sense. The interesting thing, I was talking about speaking in vignettes. Often when I go to a conference and I'm sitting around late at night talking to a group of people, I will tell one of the stories, a segment that I'm thinking about or working on, putting in a future talk, or I've had in an old talk, and I'll make little changes, and sometimes I'll change something and unexpectedly people laugh. And I make a little note, okay, well, I mean, if they laughed for a good reason, I'll make a little mental note, hey, remember that next time you say it. Or if you say a line and they just, it's crickets, they don't understand what you're saying, you have to tweak it, you have to change it. But
it's something that I learned and that has also been useful in performing magic shows.
Yes, I could see that.
I have, and you'll find that it's exactly the same thing. I have friends, professional magicians, who have a very, very, very precise script of what they're going to say and how it's timed out for every trick that they do. And I have other people who have, seemingly no preparation at all. They're just going to do the effect. And I'm somewhere in the middle. I have a couple of lines that I think might be good. I have some that are specifically there to clearly give instruction if I have, for example, an audience member up as a volunteer. And then it's about trying to be funny. I know comedians that will riff, off the cuff, the kind of, they're the people who have here's my set and it's timed out perfect. And then there's the improv type stuff. And I think what I'm doing is a mix of both. When I did the magic show a couple weeks ago here in St. Louis, I added a new trick in the middle. And it's one that I love because it adds a little danger and excitement, but there's also this great interaction with the person who's up on stage with me. But I also decided I wanted to start off with a slightly different joke. And something hit me out of the blue about, if I'm doing this mind reading type stuff, and I need volunteers, I want to be able to explain to people that if you're going to be a volunteer, you're safe. I'm not going to make fun of you. You're not going to be the butt of any jokes. You are not in any danger. But I need you up here on stage. And I decided I'd do a one-man skit of why I need volunteers, and attempted to read my own mind and failed. And it went over really well.
Oh, that's great. I've often will watch a performer or observe a performer and look for little teeny details. And a couple of years ago, my wife and I were in the front row for a Tim Minchin concert. And we were so close and so center that when he did Storm, he spit on me. And a little spittle came on me, and it was very exciting. But halfway, maybe two-thirds of the way through the concert, he stopped and called me out for staring at him. And apparently I had been obsessively tracking his every movement because I want to see, when does the left hand do this? When does the right hand do this? Why does he stand a certain way? Why does he pace a certain way? Why do you move? Because you can learn things from people who are really good at what they do. And
why isn't he wearing shoes?
Yeah, and he stopped in the middle of a song and called me out in the audience and embarrassed me, and then went back to a song because I was staring at him. And he called me Skariman, which was, I figured this is something he does in every concert. No,
Nope.
Nope, never seen it before and never seen it after. So that was my fun experience. But
you're just a little too scary.
Yeah. You also have a YouTube channel, so let's promote the crap out of that, shall we?
Oh, it'd be nice if I knew what it was.
Do I need to use the Google?
Yeah, it's one of those things where... so the easiest way to find out about me and what I'm doing is probably to go to mattdillahunty.com. But the other thing is that I don't necessarily focus on my YouTube channel. I think it's youtube.com/sans.deity. But the real spot is patreon.com/atheistdebates. Uh-huh. And I've been doing that for 3 years now. We probably have talked about it because I've been on the show during that time. But if Kickstarter is giving me a bunch of money and I'll do something, and Patreon is I'm going to do something, and if anybody likes it, they can contribute. And so each month I post 3 videos. And because the purpose of the project is to help people get better at having the conversations, not just doing a big public formal debate, but, talking to your cousin or your grandmother or somebody at work, if that's what you want to do. And the problem is that there's such a wide range of topics that you would have to become an expert on if you were to, really seriously devote yourself to this. And nobody has time for that. So each month I post 3 videos. Sometimes I take a topic like the teleological arguments or Pascal's wager. Those were a couple of the early ones. And I go through it in great detail and try to break it down where everybody can understand it and give suggestions on ways to think about it. Some of the videos are tips about what to think about what are your motivations going into this, how it's okay to say, I don't know, or that's an interesting point. Let me think about that and get back to you. There are other videos that are full debates that I've done. And then I go back through those debates and I post debate review videos where I did a debate on the resurrection with Mike Lacona. The whole video is up there. And then I go through it and talk about his opening statement, my opening statement, the rebuttals, some thoughts from Q&A to show that mistakes that he made, mistakes that I made, or things that were good on either part. And also to explain why I did what I did. And I'm not doing this from the standpoint of saying, I am Lord King Debater and everything I say is right. I'm doing it so that I can explain it so that when I get feedback, the feedback is better. That way we're both learning. Because when I talked about making a game out of the show, if I use a new line or a new tactic for a particular topic, the next day or within a couple of days when I get home, there'll be a couple different emails saying, oh, you should have said this or you should have said that. And usually they're suggesting something that I have said, a dozen times in the past, but occasionally it's something new. And so on the Atheist Debates Patreon project, I'll go through and explain what my thinking was before the debate and what it was during the debate and why I decided to focus on, this particular part of their opening statement or argument and not focus on this other one. And I hope everybody I've talked to has been very supportive. There's a bunch of patrons who are supporting it now. I've been doing it for 3 years. I make enough to pay the mortgage and travel around doing lectures and debates, so I can't possibly complain.
Well, one of the things I know we talked about in St. Louis is you're not good enough or you don't want to. I don't know exactly the psychology, what's wrong in your head about asking for money. So I'm going to do it for you. So listeners, if you like Matt's debates, and like he said, it's patreon.com/atheistdebates. And of course, you can watch it on YouTube at youtube.com/user/sans-deity, S-A-N-S deity, sans deity. But the Patreon page is where you can go donate a few bucks. You don't have to give $100 per video. Of course, that would be nice.
You can. Yeah, you can. I have a couple people who did that.
You can do $2 or $5 or $10. And one of the things that I want listeners to do and listen to this, and because of the often financial topics that I talk about, I know I have listeners that have money. And one of the things that I'm a real big proponent of is donating and giving back. And you can give a couple of dollars to Matt. And I actually encourage people to go to other podcasts, other shows, cartoonists, whatever you like, whatever you think is meaningful. give them some money, because Matt is one of the very, very few people, I can probably count them on two hands, people that are making a living doing this. And we need dozens and dozens, if not hundreds. So you can't give too much money. So, you can go to Matt's Patreon, but you can go somewhere else. You can do Matt's and somewhere else. But people, you've got to give some money. You've got to pay back. If you have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and you listen to the show and you want to do something nice, boy, that'd be nice. And it's not just to help Matt. It's to help people that watch Matt's videos so he can have the time. Because, Matt, if you don't do these videos, if you made nothing from Patreon, what are you going to do? Were you in IT before? Is that right?
I was a software QA lead for a software company. I did that I was in the Navy for 8 years, and then I got out and worked in the tech industry for a while. The problem is, years before I started doing the Patreon thing, I was still running around lecturing and everything else, but I was, paying for a good chunk of it out of my pocket. I was burning all my vacation days doing it. And, that's what I did for a decade. Because it was a mission. I had a good job, and I was using that to help push the community forward. Then when I lost my job, people were like, "Oh, you should just do the atheist, do lectures and debates and other stuff full time." And I wasn't sure that there was any money in it. Luckily, the community's been supportive enough so that I haven't had to sell my house or anything. But also, I'm doing more and more. So I'm booked. Oh my gosh. It's been really busy July, August, and September. And I'm doing bigger events. I think I'm doing like 4 events with Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss in the next 2.5 months, 3 months, something like that. But what we're doing is we're using those things. I don't want to say we're just using them. I mean, I'm enjoying doing it, and I'm hoping people are getting a lot out of it. But if we can't just have, Dawkins isn't going to be around forever. And, there shouldn't be any one single person that is as, I don't know, the outside world has a view that, like, Richard is the Pope of atheism. And now Richard doesn't have that view, and most of the atheists I talk to don't. Certainly, big rock star of atheism. But my goal is to, build my brand up and use that to build up the brands of the people who I think should be listened to more than myself, more than, Dawkins, Harris, et cetera. So Travis, my manager, and I put together a list of people that I want to see get a lot more public attention. And so one of the things is when we go to Vancouver in November, it's going to be me, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the three of us just sitting on a stage talking. And it'll be the second time we've done that. But the very next night in the same venue, it's going to be me with Tracy Harris, who's my co-host from The Atheist Experience, or one of them, and Sarah Hayter from Ex-Muslims of North America. And we're going to be doing an event about escaping religion. And those voices, I think Sarah and Tracy have a lot to offer and should be seen a bunch more. So I'm hoping to do more events like that. And that way you have a pool of, you don't need like the one atheist celebrity to book for your convention and, suck all the money out of the fundraising efforts because some people are more expensive than others. There's people none of us have ever heard of who would be great speakers and have great stories to tell and have a different insight to some of these discussions, which is, I'd been hosting the TV show for probably 5 or 6 years before it really hit me. The point that I made earlier about somebody who grew up with the idea that they had done something so bad that God had to kill somebody to make up for it. And I think if we had more voices out there that people were paying attention to, those types of stories, those types of realizations would start to permeate all of society, not just the secular community, but maybe the Christian community would start to realize, hey, we're doing damage to some people's psyche. And I think on some level they already know it, which is why you get churches that are fire and brimstone and all about hell, and churches that are the exact opposite, even though they're all drawing from the same book.
Yeah, that is amazing how it's different. And the interesting thing, and I don't talk about it a lot, but one of the things that helped my wife out of religion is I had a job assignment for 2 years in Arkansas, and I went there for 6 months by myself, and then her and the kids came down for one school year, and I devilishly planned for us to do something fun every Sunday morning, like going to caves or on top of a mountain or a lake or, floating on a lake, anything. And after a couple of months, she figured it out that I was doing this on purpose, and she said she's going to go. And she went to the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church in Bentonville, Arkansas, and she came back from the service and was just enraged and was ranting about this church. And it was one of those rare moments in my life that I was smart enough to not talk, because she was going on about the problems with this church or why she didn't like the church. And as another human being, as the husband, I would have only ruined it by speaking. And she finally got to the conclusion, because Missouri Synod Lutheran in Illinois and Wisconsin and Missouri, and probably all around most of the country, is very, very quiet, very somber. And when you read a song from the hymnal and it has 7 verses, you sing all 7, even if it takes 10 minutes. Well, the one she went to on the stage had drums and a guitar, and people were jumping around and dancing and doing hand raising, and she was freaking out by this. And after this long discussion, she said something along the lines of, "You know what I think?" And I'm physically covering my mouth with my hands so I can't speak. And she goes, "I think that they've modified the style of the service to maximize their income." I could have never said anything that clever. She said it. And that's one of the things that set her down this path of like, well, why our church is different, to tie back into what you said. And Americans either go to the church of their parents, or they switch through and hop through a couple different churches until they find the one that they like for whatever reasons, and it fits them, and then they just kind of hunker down.
Yeah, when my dad worked for the airline, and we moved every 5 years or so, and that meant finding a new church. And the process was the same every time. We would get moved into the home, and then once things settled down, it was, okay, now we're going to start our hunt for a church. And we would visit primarily Baptist churches. Matter of fact, almost exclusively Baptist churches. I went to a couple Pentecostal churches, mainly because they had better concerts. But we would go to the Baptist churches, and then Mom and Dad would sort out whichever one. I think it came down to whichever one my mom was convinced the preacher was, right with God.
Right.
Which meant basically we were going to whatever church my mom, with my dad's approval, because of course he's the head of the house as Christ is the head of the church.
Of course.
And so now, and I don't know that, I'm not knocking the method, because I don't know what other method you could really use. You're either convinced that you have the truth or you're not. So even moving around to different churches, you find the church that's going to spoon feed you the stuff that you already have accepted. If your church doctrine departs too much from what you already accept, they've got a steep burden to overcome. And I don't think, when you talk about, hey, they've tailored the service to maximize their income, I think that's accurate. I think it's true. I don't think that it was the intent.
No, it's not a conscious choice.
Went in saying, hey, let's see how, what can we do to make sure we make the most money? It's just that without even realizing it, bringing in people and money is the barometer of how successful you're doing as a church. It's not like they're like, oh, let's get the most money. It's let's be the most active church. And it turns out that the most active church is the one that's bringing in people and money. So, of course, you modify what you're doing. You try things out, same as we were talking about in speeches. You keep the jokes that work. You toss out the ones that don't. And the thing is, if there was a God, and, it's like science classes don't try, perhaps they should try a little harder.
Indeed.
But don't try to make the teaching of science a money-making, pleasurable experience.
It's not a comedy routine.
Here's what science is. Here are the methods that we use in science. Here's why. Here are some of the findings of science. These are all tentative. It's fully acknowledged. We're not claiming absolute certainty. We're not claiming anything like that. It's tentative information that's the best model, our best understanding of this. It's not sold. It's not marketed. And if there was a God, then the religion surrounding that God would be tied to a fundamental truth. And all of a sudden, teaching that fundamental truth would no longer be a marketing thing. It would just be a matter of fact. It would be, here's our methods for discovering, religious truths or spiritual truths. Here are the findings of those things. And then they would, either claim that they're tentative or absolute. But there would be no, what's the purpose in, sending out flyers and having a big light show and having the songs and everything else? I don't have any songs in my science classes.
Well, I see every schism as further evidence that it's all made up by humans. And like you said, they pick and choose, and I know that, you know that, and our listeners know that. And I think church hopping, second only to Bible reading, is a great method for people to end up leaving religion in total, because they get to see what it's different. And if you go to a Pentecostal church, and then you go to a Methodist church, and then an Anglican church, and then a Baptist church, and you see how they're all so incredibly different, but you think they're all, air quotes, Christian, you've got to wonder what's going on.
So there's an interesting point on that. We talk about the internet being where religions go to die, and how the internet has been of great use to you, to me, to others who are getting information out, standing up in opposition to religion. But we ought to be cautious, because the internet has also been a big boom for religious individuals. And if you have particular doctrines, so I'm going to use a family member that I know for an example. They no longer go to church. Now, they're thinking about going back to church. They will visit him. But by and large, they have doctrines, and they found preachers on YouTube who share their particular doctrines. And the problem that you're pointing to of, hey, if you explore a bunch of different, quote unquote Christian churches, you're likely to start realizing that, wow, there's a lot of variety here, and some things don't make sense. The problem is with the fundamentalist doctrine, which I was raised with. It's those conflicts are annihilated. They don't matter. They have zero impact. The fact that there were other churches calling themselves Christians who had different doctrines from us was never a problem for me, because we had the right doctrine, and we had the Bible verses that said many will profess Christianity but won't be true Christians, and you'll know them by their works, and that there's many false believers and charlatans, and not everybody who says Lord, Lord is actually of me, and all these. You use all these verses together to point out. I was taught basically from the time I was 5 that Catholicism was a cult. That it was a Mary and saint worshiping cult. The Bible says you pray to God, Jesus being God too, and Catholics are praying to Mary, which is, not doctrinally sound, so it's a cult. They may be good people. We knew that, Mormons were probably good people, but it was a false doctrine. And as soon as you have in your mind that the doctrines that aren't yours are false, the impact of observing conflict or contradictory positions coming from different churches, that is diminished. I wish it had more impact.
It is to a point, but it's also I think the case, and correct me if I'm wrong or you disagree, but someone who's in a fundamentalist church is less likely to switch churches, and they're more likely just to kind of snap right out of it.
Yeah. To be sure, I'm talking about more fundamentalists, and then you've got liberal churches and moderate churches. There's been a lot of discussion about that. I actually recommended. I'm going to Orange County this weekend. I'll be at 2 events in Orange County and Los Angeles on this Saturday and Sunday. I don't have a link handy. I'm not even sure if there's one up at mattdillahunty.com, but it'll be posted on Facebook. But the first time I was out there, the talk that I gave was about targeting fundamentalists. And, granted, I don't make outgoing calls on the show. I'm not targeting anybody. I'm having conversations with whoever wants to have them. But liberal and moderate Christians, for example, already have a softened, modified doctrine such that it's malleable.
Right.
If you point out a problem with the Bible, what do you get from moderate and liberal Christians? You get, well, this was the best thinking of the people of the time. Not everything in the Bible is, this is man's thoughts about God, whereas the fundamentalist thinks this is God's thoughts for men. And I think that the foundation of a fundamentalist believer is so rigid and so thin that you take it out and everything crumbles, and they are less likely to slip off into liberal and moderate versions of it because they've been taught from birth that all those weak sauce cafeteria personal interpretation churches are not doctrinally sound. And so if you go after the fundamentalists, you have a target that is attackable. If you go after the wishy-washy, I love Reverend Barry Lynn, and he's done amazing work for church-state separation, but he has a really weak sauce notion of God from what little I've been able to pull out of him. I don't think that he's that concerned about textual problems with the Bible or the history of Christianity or, whether or not this stuff makes sense, because he's bought into the notion that, hey, there's a God, and maybe someday if I'm lucky and I go to heaven, God will make it all make sense. All these things that seem confusing, but I just need to keep the faith and keep my trust. You talk to a fundamentalist and you have something that's very, very different. They know that they know that they know that they know. They are absolutely certain, and this is the case. And there was the Earth might be 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Not every fundamentalist goes down that path, but the flood happened and God happened. These things aren't allegory. God is the reason there's a rainbow in the sky, and there wasn't a rainbow before the flood. And when you start attacking those things, and what either happens is they become more entrenched, but less willing to publicly stand up for those beliefs. There's only so many times you can be in this position of being publicly embarrassed and still keep going out and doing it. So you've diminished the strength of their voice or their confidence, even if they maintain the belief, or that belief crumbles, which is why you have the Clergy Project, which is why you have seminaries that do textual criticism, the structured analytical examination of the Bible. They produce a lot of atheists, and fundamentalist parents are basically taught, don't send your kids to college and only send them to these particular seminaries. That's why Liberty University and the various Bible colleges do really well, because you send your fundamentalist kid to the University of Texas, Austin, this liberal hippie, let's smoke weed and swim naked in Town Lake, town, where there's an atheist experience TV show on public access, and they're getting taught things that they never would have even dreamed of in their little insular fundamentalist environment, and you get a boatload of atheists.
Well, it's curious. My very first year of college, I was in a triple, so it was me and two roommates, and one of the roommates, unbeknownst to me, because I had never encountered this, because I grew up, my family was Methodist, and around 13 I decided I was an atheist. I didn't really think about religion that much. I didn't even know anything about Islam or Buddhism or other world religions. I didn't really care. I just thought it was all silly. And one of my two roommates was apparently a very fundamentalist, very small-town guy, and he literally thought everybody in the world, or at least everyone in America, had the exact same religion that he did. And when he got to college and met everybody, and everybody was different, and everyone disagreed with him, even people that were Christian, he didn't make it one semester. He just could not mentally handle the dissonance. Smart kid, but he had been so indoctrinated into a belief system, a worldview, that when he stepped out of that bubble and found the world to be so vastly and violently different, he just could not handle it and had to go back home.
For me, it was, I didn't go to college. I left, graduated from high school, went in the Navy for 8.5 years. And that was a similar experience. Not so much. I knew that there were other people with other religious beliefs. But when you're in the military, it's a completely different life structure. You are, property of the United States government. You have a diminished set of rights. You have an incredibly formally structured world of this person's in charge of this person and these are the rules. But you also have downtime. And when you're, I don't know how it is in every one of the armed forces, but in the Navy, boot camp is one thing. And then there's the real Navy. Actually, there's boot camp, and then there's the training areas, and then there's the real Navy. And then once you get out in the real Navy, it's like real life. You talk about, how what a bullshit goofball your CO is or whatever, and you do that private with your buddies. So there's this camaraderie there, and it's not necessarily insubordination. But when you're stuck living in a berthing, in a room not much bigger than the one I'm in now, with 15, 20 guys in racks, and you're sharing every meal, and you're standing watches, and you have to wake each other up, and you're looking out for each other. Some things become less important, and so conflicting differences about religious views just either don't get talked about, or they go away. And by that I mean the entire 8 years that I was in the Navy, I was still a fundamentalist Christian. I did not attend church at all during this period of time, not even Navy Chapel, because those services were so let's be everything to everybody that they were useless. They weren't at all like what I thought of as church. So I would do some, independent Bible study, but I'm also, 18, 19, 20, et cetera, and traveling the world and going to cool places and wanting to hang out and drink with people. And some people's religions let them drink and some didn't. Mine didn't, but, maybe mine was wrong. So I'm going to go out and drink and party and, do this stuff. And you find out that there are a lot more things, by and large, that unite us than divide us. And the fact that we have different views about religion doesn't mean that we couldn't agree on a whole bunch of other stuff. And even if we disagree, it doesn't mean that we can't work together towards a common goal. I didn't realize it at the time, but the 8.5 years I spent in the military, both helped me find my way out of my own religion eventually, helped me try to engage more in charitable listening and making sure that I wasn't pretending that I could read minds or just writing somebody off, oh, you believe that? Well, you're, an idiot or whatever. And it set up everything that well, not everything, but it set up a good portion of how and why I do what I do. And we had people talking about, should we have firebrands or diplomats? And I always found that absurd, because depending on who you talk to and which clips of me they've seen, I'm either an amazing firebrand or an amazing diplomat. And the truth is, I can be both, depending on the situation. It's about caring enough and paying enough attention to your target audience to tailor things to them, and to do so in a way that's not two-faced or fake. It's not like I'm, talking to one group and I'm one person, and I talk to another group and I'm another person. It's about honestly representing and framing your thoughts in a way that's going to be most receptive to the audience and yet not dishonest. I don't recall. I certainly could see how some people might see it as being fake. When you're in a big public debate, Matt, you're respectful and you wait and you sit there quietly and you don't interrupt. Yes, because that's the rules of debate. That's not the rules of the TV show. And when I'm in a debate, I have exactly one opponent. If I hang up on him, there's not 5 other lines worth of people going.
Right.
So the TV show and the debates are different. And I have a great deal of respect for both of them. But one of them is about mass communication, interacting with and trying to have as many good conversations as you can. And the other one is about engaging with the one person who's there representing that view. And I've had debate opponents that were awful, that I would have hung up on in 15 seconds had it been another situation. And I love the fact that because I'm stuck in that debate, it forces me to find some way to make it better. And you have to be careful. On more than one occasion, I've come up against an opponent who just really had no business being in that conversation. They hadn't thought through it enough. Nothing like that. And if you push too hard, it looks like you're kicking an infant or kicking a fourth grader. So you have to kind of pull back. And they're like, oh, why would you pull back? We love it when you're rah, rah, rah and rant on religion.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm constantly monitoring and thinking, what would my mom think? What would my grandmother think? What would this person who, goes to the Free Will Baptist Church think? What would this Catholic relative of mine think? How would this impact them? Like I said, there may be something functionally wrong with my brain, but except for when I'm asleep, there's a lot going on in there. Even if it looks like I'm just talking to one person. And now it may be a lot of, stuff that's not very good. But I'm constantly trying to look at things from as many angles as I can.
Well, I know I vary my tactics when I talk to people, and usually the two topics are investing and religion, which is why my show has those two things. The trick that I use is if I feel myself going on for too long, I'll try to be demure and say something like, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to get carried away. I don't want to bore you to death. My apologies." And they go, "No, I actually have a question." And that's the official permission. I have another 5, 10, 15 minutes to go on because they are interested and they're engaged. And I had to do that pause and that check, because otherwise you're the bored with the person sitting there going, how do I get out of this conversation? Because they don't know how to change the topic. Another thing, and it's been over a year since you were on the show, you were working on a book. Does that come out any day now? What's going on, dude?
Okay, so I'll give you the 100% honest skinny on the book.
Okay, because I kind of like when people lie to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I know what it's called. It's outlined. There are parts of it that are written. There are parts of it that are being mulled in my head. And it has not been a priority for a very simple reason. If I were, and I will finish, I do plan to finish the book, and I expect it to be done by next March. I'm going to start a world tour in March of the U.S., Europe, and Canada. So not really a world tour, but it's some more of the world than what I always...
It's an international tour.
Yeah, it's an international tour. The book should be printed prior to that. My manager wanted it done by November. That will not happen. You never know how long it's going to take until you've done one. But the reason it wasn't a priority for me is, let's say I wrote the book, got it out. It would be a monumentally successful result to sell 10,000 copies of a first book from a relatively unknown author.
Unknown author, yeah.
Yeah. And the book is called If I Were God. And I like the title and the subject matter. I think it's approachable by atheists and theists alike. But if selling a book is going to get 10,000 copies, and I can post a video tomorrow that hits 10,000 people within a couple hours of me posting it, then the book is the least efficient manner of getting my ideas out. It's a massive time investment for perhaps not much return. My thinking on this has changed a bit recently.
Well, it's good because I was just going to say you were wrong.
I have a problem with the idea that, you're a published author and therefore this, grants you some stature. It's a fact that it does.
Yes.
My opposition to whether or not it should is irrelevant. I don't care whether somebody's a published author when I listen to them talk or present their ideas. But it would be stupid of me not to recognize that that's the way things work, and that it is a better marketing thing to allow me to do more talks. If I'm on standby to go on Bill Maher, why am I going on Bill Maher if I don't have, but all of a sudden, hey, he's a published author. He's here to talk about his new book. Boom, boom, boom. That recognition amps everything up.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to is that, I've been to conferences where they have an author of a book, and it's a nice book, lovely book, the best book, and the person gets up there and stands behind the podium and reads from their slides. And for me, it's an agonizing and painful 45 minutes because my thought is that if I wanted to hear you read aloud your book, I would have ordered the audiobook.
Yeah.
And not everybody who can write is a good presenter and vice versa. But there is the possibility, and you're right, it's not fair and it's not reasonable, but the book industry does carry inappropriate weight, perhaps, that maybe you get picked up on the Today Show and they have you on for 2 minutes and someone goes, what is this guy? And they go check it out. Because a lot of the people that you're talking to in your YouTube videos are the same people week after week after week. So they change, of course. Some get bored, some are new, just like with my show. But if you can reach a whole new audience, even if you feel like you've gotten this inappropriate new level of respect, I'm sympathetic to that. And I tell people on my finance part all the time, don't believe what I say just because I'm a voice on a podcast. Go check it out yourself. But I think, if you want to have an impact on more people, on different people, a book is just an alternate way to do that. So hurry up and get it done. So November's off, but maybe March, we're fingers crossed.
So March is my deadline, and I work best when there's a deadline. Well,
then you have to have it done by tomorrow, dude.
Yeah. I can't do it by tomorrow. But people are like, hey, why do your videos always come out the last few days of the month? It's because I spent the first 20 days of the month making sure that I had all my ducks in a row to get them out, and I realized, I can finish it then. I love working under pressure, which is why I like the live TV show. It's why I like debates. If I have extra time, man, there's other stuff I'll spend it on, which is why I don't get burnt out. People are like, you do so much. How come you're not burnt out? Well, I still watch movies and play games, and I go out to, water parks, and, I go take care of the lawn, and I do that stuff. I might be, thinking about the next debate the whole time I'm mowing the lawn or whatever. The thing with the book, I know a lot of people who have published, self-published and otherwise. And by and large, very few of them make any real money off of the book.
Right, that's hard.
And even my friends who publish a book and who, they're on all the major news networks promoting as part of a tour, some of them have just gone back to day jobs. They're no longer active in the community. And I feel like I felt like I was already in a place where that the book wasn't going to do me much good. At least not enough good to justify the work that went into it. And only recently have I really buckled down and said, you know what, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of intangible and unknown benefits from actually having the book, not the least of which is that, hey, you've got something to sell and perhaps sign when you go to things. But my primary focus has always been, let's get the message out. And so when I looked at it as just, raw effort versus reach, the book was the lowest thing on the totem pole.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's one of those things, kind of circle around what we talked about before. Sometime going to conferences, there's anywhere from a couple hundred to maybe several hundred people there. Most of them know you or have heard something that you've said. And you're not getting paid, where when you make a video, you reach 10,000 and you can make a few bucks at it. So what are you supposed to do? But, of course, people like to meet people in person. So it all adds up. And I don't need, anyone who listens to the show regularly knows I don't need new clients because they come to me through the podcast. But I'm still going to conferences, partly because I like it. And I love to meet everybody. You never know how it's going to work out.
That is probably the biggest reason that, I go. Conferences, I don't make any money off of. Even some bigger speaking events, I don't really make money off of. It would be much more cost effective for me just to stay here in Austin and put out 3 videos a month for the Patreon thing, and focus on making them better and better and get better reach. However, I'm a performer. I do magic. I love being in front of an audience. I love the chance to meet people at the conventions and have, the real down and dirty conversations about what's going on and what people think. And I am, despite what some people think, I love it when people come up and say, hey, you are monumentally wrong on this, and I'd love to convince you. Because if in fact they can, and it has happened, I'm better off. And, I had some fun. I'm only kind of half joking with this. Lawrence Krauss and I did an event in Toronto, and I had already changed his mind on one thing at a previous event, but we were live on stage in Toronto, and in the span of like 5 minutes, I changed his mind on 2 other things. And no matter what issues people have with, me or him or anybody else or what's going on. I love engaging with people who can change my mind and educate me, and who are willing to have their minds changed and acknowledge, yep, hey, that's a better answer, or, I was vastly wrong, or, you know what, I think I'm going to try this out to see how effective it is at getting the message across. Because the goal is to put myself and every other atheist speaker, presenter out of work with regards to secularism.
Right.
And have that shift into furthering secular humanism and a reasonable secular society that's based on science and good information. We can do both simultaneously. I'm not saying that we have to kill off religion to get there. I just think that I'm working where I'm best suited now, but I'm thinking long term and big picture to try to make the world better before I'm dead.
Well, it just reminded me a couple of days ago, I was on someone else's wall arguing with a religious person, and they accused me of being part of big secularism. How's that? And someone on my wall changes it to big secular, but I was like, I'm not making money from this massive, mysterious group of secularists that now I have kind of a luxurious position in the movement that my business makes me real money. And so I try to give away 10% of the gross, but not everybody can. So again, listeners, once again, go to Patreon, donate a few bucks to Matt. And if you donate to Matt, which is awesome, I think I want you to also find somebody else to donate to. So I want you to donate to 2 people. It doesn't have to be big, but go help out, because Matt's talking about we need more voices, and those voices have bills to pay. So go help them out so they can continue to be voices. And Matt, I think we've used up our entire 15-minute allotment now. So is there anything that you want to throw in here at the end, how they can reach you, any thoughts that you've been waiting to throw out and you haven't done it yet?
No, they can go to mattdillahunty.com. They can email sansdeity, sans.deity @gmail.com. My YouTube is YouTube/sansdeity. But the bigger thing, and I appreciate people reaching out to me, and, we talked about, I love that. I want to encourage people who are not particularly active in the broader secular community to consider being more open, more out, and more active. Not just, hey, I'm going to go to this conference because, conferences need support and money, but because the more out and open secularists, atheists we have, the closer we get to normalcy for that, to where the person who's never been involved, never seen any of this stuff, starts to go, oh yeah, that's a thing. That's not just some weird thing that's, this extreme minority. I'm actually aware. I have an atheist neighbor. I have a friend who's a, secular activist. I have, I've seen atheists helping the homeless in my town, the actual organization, and humanists at work, and all of these things that change and fight against the stereotype that has been placed on atheists and secularists by preachers and pastors for generations.
Well, I just had a weird experience, and we're going to end, I promise, at some point. But a friend of the family who is a hardcore fundamentalist Christian who won't talk to me, I recently ran into, and they were very nice and pleasant to me, and acknowledged that they read a lot of the stuff on my wall, and a good chunk of it makes sense and is right. And they are actually able to say that I was an atheist out loud without cringing or fearing that they were going to get hit by lightning. And so It was just the weirdest thing that, like you said, even in their own head, it's kind of become, okay, it's okay. It's Phil. Phil's a nice guy, and he just happens to be an atheist versus this boogeyman in their head of what an atheist is. So I concur. Please, if you're safe, we don't want you to do anything stupid, but if you're in a situation where you can talk about it, make it more open. And I want us to be in a world where I stop running into people saying, I've never met an atheist in my life. Yeah, you have, but almost all of them were quiet about it. So
I don't want to open a big rabbit hole at the end of this, but there's a point that kind of dovetails this about changing how you think about the world, about digging in on the biases that you have and why this is so important to do for other people. And the example that came up just yesterday, somebody referred to my wife as white trash. And that's an interesting phrase because, let me flip this for a second. White chocolate. The reason you put the word white on white chocolate is because chocolate already has a definition that would exclude white. White would not be included within chocolate, which means that the reason you would call someone white trash is because trash already excludes whites. It's not that you're being explicitly racist or that you're, a KKK advocate, but there's an implicit notion, typically from people who have grown up in white societies, that trash applies to people other than us. And that's why you have to put on the white trash in there. And so just realizing that that is betraying bigotry and biases within you and that you don't want. I believe that almost anybody who's using this phrase, they're not going to identify, as racist or even acknowledge that bigotry until you get that little woke moment of, oh, wow, why did I put that clarifier on there? And the same thing happens when you try to other, or when our society tries to other secularists and atheists. And as soon as we get to the point that you were talking about, where anybody in the room, Christian or theist, or Christian, whatever theist or atheist, is able to identify someone and say, oh, this is Matt, he's an atheist, without anyone in the room cringing, now we're on the right track.
Yeah, and you did open a whole can of worms, so I'm going to just say maybe next time we'll dig into that more, listeners. So, Matt, thank you for being on the Phil Ferguson Show, and if nothing else, I will see you for the solar eclipse that American Atheists planned for their conference.
Yes, it's amazing how they could do that.
They're very, very good at that organization. So thanks again, Matt. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Hey you, it's me, Sarah Silverman. Lately I've noticed a lot of really sad, really long commercials on TV with grossly sick, emaciated people from all over the world. And it turns out they look that way because they don't have food. And I know what you're thinking. If you don't like it, Silverman, TiVo passed it. I did. You still see them. Especially because, I have a 48-inch plasma high-def TV. So every devastating image is in, brilliant, crisp, vivid. Like they're in my apartment, So how do I get these people out of my apartment, basically? And I think I figured it out. All I have to do is end world hunger. And then I'm like, okay, how are you going to end world hunger? And then it hit me. Sell the Vatican, feed the world. Think about it. We need a hero, and who is more primed to be our hero than the Pope? He's literally a caped crusader. What is the Vatican worth, $500 billion? This is great. Sell the Vatican, take a big chunk of that money, build a gorgeous condominium for you and all of your friends to live in, all the amenities, swimming pool, tennis court, water slide. And with the money left over, feed the whole fucking world. You preach to live humbly, and I totally agree. So now maybe it's time for you to move out of your house that is a city. On an ego level alone, you will be the biggest hero in the history of ever. And by the way, any involvement in the Holocaust, bygones. I know some of you out there are like, well, why don't those bums get a job like the rest of us? Well, did you know that the average Arby's employee in Ethiopia only gets paid nothing an hour because they don't have one. They don't have one. The bottom line is this. If you sell the Vatican and you take that money and you use it to feed every single human being on the planet, you will get crazy pussy. All the pussy. And I don't mean literally. That might not be your cup of tea. I don't know what your version of all the pussy is. But you'll get all the pussy. Amen.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, I know that went a little long, so hopefully you enjoyed it. That was Matt Dillahunty, in case you didn't figure that out by now. We had a great time talking, over an hour. A couple other things going on. I will be at the American Atheist Convention. This is now mid-late August. So the next show is going to be more than a week from now. Just embrace it. You got to own it. But I know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about opioid addiction. So we're going to have a great time with that. And I had some fun trying to get an airline ticket because originally my wife and I were going to drive down and back. And one of our thoughts was, if there's rain in South Carolina, we could just bail on the conference early and drive back to Kentucky or Tennessee or even Southern Illinois and see the solar eclipse from there. But I started hearing stories about small towns along the path of the eclipse that are just going to be jam-packed with people. And so it'd be completely and totally unreasonable to think that I'm going to be able to make good time driving back through the insanity of the traffic. Started thinking really hard about that, and then something came up for my wife that she needed to take care of, and everybody's fine. Thank you for asking. But something she needs to take care of that same weekend, and it just made more sense for me to fly since I'm going by myself. I went to get a ticket, $1,600. I could not do it. I did have an option to fly on Spirit Airlines, Spirit Airways for $300. I couldn't do that either. If you've had experience with Spirit that's been good, let me know. Maybe I'm missing out on the opportunity of a lifetime. Of course, my email is phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. But I went up with a flight from Delta to Myrtle Beach. I'm going to have to rent a car and drive an hour and a half, 2 hours down to North Charleston, South Carolina for the American Atheist Conference. So I hope to see you there. If you're going, run up to me, say hello, and please forgive me. And this is something that mortifies me every time it happens, but I'm just going to own it. If you walk up to me at a conference and you are a client, and I've either never met you in person or I met you once a year ago, please forgive me. I meet a lot of people at many conferences over the years, and I'm better with numbers than I am with names and faces. So feel free to introduce yourself. I'd be delighted to meet you in person and say hello, but just don't be mad if I forget your name, because it happens to me, and I'm embarrassed by it, but it's just the way the world works, I guess. So the American Atheist Conference, next show will be more than a week, and we're going to talk about opioid addiction. Until then, ciao.
Girls be checking my purity ring. I'm at the bookstore, you know what section I'm looking for. This is how I roll, and I'm being studied by Cloud Control. When you count stats, I'm at the mall, passing out tracks.
Girl, let that Bible. Girl, let that Bible. Girl, let that Bible.
I wear it out.
Girl, let that Bible. Girl, let that Bible. Girl, let that Bible.
I wear it out.
When I walk in the church, this is what I see.
Okay.
Everybody heart, and I'm not afraid to show it, show it, show it, show it. I'm Christian and I know it. I'm Christian and I know it.
Yeah, when I'm at Revive, everybody feel my Jesus vibe. And when I'm at the beach, you know it's the gospel I'm gonna preach. This is how I roll, come on Matt Caps, it's time to go. We're heading to the church, brother, don't be nervous. On my feet, no sleep, and I'm still at service, yeah!
Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible.
I wear it out.
Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible.
I wear it out.
When I walk in the church, this is what I see. Everybody stops and they're praying with me. I got a passion in my heart, and I'm not afraid to show it, show it, show it, show it. I'm Christian and I know it. I'm Christian and I know it.
Flip it, yeah. Read it, yeah. Study, yeah. Live it, yeah.
Do the quiet time. Do the quiet time. Yeah. I'm Christian and I know it.
Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible.
I wear it out.
Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible. Girl, look at that Bible.
I wear it out.